In the dry, unforgiving air of Arizona Territory, 1877, the small mining settlement of Dead Creek shuddered against the evening wind. Lanterns swayed on porch posts as the last streaks of amber light dissolved into the horizon. The silhouette of a woman moved through the gathering darkness, Eleanor Blackwood, her burgundy dress catching the fading light as she walked with purpose toward the desert's edge. Those who saw her that evening would later recall how she paused at the town's boundary, where the rutted wagon trail met the vast emptiness beyond. She looked back once, her gaze sweeping over the collection of weather-beaten buildings, before turning and stepping into the dense fog that had mysteriously rolled in from the canyon. She never arrived at her destination, just 7 miles away. By morning, when the stagecoach driver reported no sign of her at Copper Canyon Station, Dead Creek stirred with unease. Sheriff James Holden organized the first search party before noon, 12 men on horseback who combed the direct path to the canyon and found nothing. No tracks in the hard soil, no torn fabric caught on cacti, no signs of struggle. Eleanor Blackwood had simply ceased to exist between one step and the next. 3 days later, after expanding their search to 15 square miles, the men returned with empty canteens and sunburned faces. Sheriff Holden wrote in his official report, "It is as if the desert itself opened up and swallowed her whole." What made Eleanor's disappearance all the more perplexing was the weather that night. Witnesses in Dead Creek described an unusual fog, thick, low-lying, and isolated to the path toward Copper Canyon. Some claimed it moved against the wind, rolling inward from the desert rather than from the nearby mountains. Others insisted they heard strange, hollow sounds within it, like distant bells or whispers, according to Abigail Parker, who watched from her window above the general store. Eleanor had worked at the Broken Spoke Saloon for nearly a year, serving drinks, occasionally singing in a low, melodious voice that turned heads. She kept mostly to herself, revealing little about her past, except that she'd come west from St. Louis after losing her family. Harold Tillman, owner of the Broken Spoke, described her as reliable, dignified, not like most of the girls who passed through. What Tillman didn't mention, but what others knew, was that Eleanor possessed an unusual quality that set her apart, a quiet intelligence that manifested in her habit of recording everything she observed in a small leather journal she kept with her at all times. That journal was missing too. What had brought Eleanor to Dead Creek remained unclear. The town itself was hardly a destination, just a cluster of buildings that had sprung up around a silver strike that proved less profitable than hoped. By 1877, Dead Creek was already in decline, with half-empty saloons and a main street collecting tumbleweeds. The creek itself had dried up years before, leaving nothing but a rocky gully that filled briefly during the rare desert storms. Most residents were just passing through, hoping to save enough money to move on to more promising territories. Yet Eleanor had stayed, working 6 nights a week at the saloon, living in a small room behind the barbershop, and walking alone each Sunday to deliver letters to the Copper Canyon Station, letters that some said were never actually posted, as no one ever saw her receive mail in return. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel, because these forgotten American frontier stories reveal the dark undercurrents of history that shaped our nation in ways still felt today. The night of her disappearance, Lucy Henshaw, a young woman who worked alongside Eleanor at the saloon, recalled a strange conversation. Eleanor was different that evening, more talkative than usual. She asked me if I believed that some places remember what happens on them. I didn't understand what she meant, but she had this look in her eyes like she knew something the rest of us didn't. Sheriff Holden's investigation stalled within a week. Dead Creek had no telegraph line, and the nearest territorial marshal was 3 days' ride away. The sheriff sent word about the missing woman, but with limited resources and multiple jurisdictional concerns throughout the territory, territorial authorities showed little interest in the disappearance of a single saloon girl. Inside Eleanor's room, the sheriff found few personal possessions. 3 dresses hanging on pegs, a small collection of books, unusual titles about geological formations and Native American beliefs, and a single photograph of a stern-looking older couple, presumably her parents. Nothing explained where she'd been heading that night or why she'd chosen to walk into the desert fog. The mystery might have ended there, relegated to local legend, except for what happened 2 weeks after Eleanor vanished. When the first body appeared along the same trail, arranged in a manner that suggested something far more complex than a simple disappearance. And beside the body, a single page torn from a journal, the handwriting unmistakably Eleanor's. Within days, Dead Creek would find itself at the center of a mystery that would challenge not just Sheriff Holden's understanding of law and order, but the very foundations upon which the small community had built itself. For in the harsh landscape surrounding the settlement, something had been awakened, something connected to both Eleanor Blackwood and the dark history of Dead Creek itself. Long before it became Dead Creek, the narrow valley had been called Whispering Shadows by the Apache people who avoided camping there, claiming the land itself spoke in voices that drove men to madness. Spanish explorers in the early 1700s named it Arroyo de los Muertos, Creek of the Dead, after finding the remains of an entire Native American camp where dozens had died of no apparent cause, their bodies unmarked but arranged in a perfect circle facing outward. By the time American settlers and prospectors arrived in the 1860s, these stories had been forgotten or dismissed. The creek still flowed then, a rare desert water source that made the location viable for settlement despite its isolation. The first silver strike in 1869 brought a rush of prospectors, followed by merchants, saloon keepers, and women of various stations seeking opportunity. Within 5 years, Dead Creek had grown to over 300 residents, with a main street boasting 2 saloons, a hotel, general store, assay office, and the beginnings of respectability. Then the water stopped flowing. Overnight, in the summer of 1873, the creek ran dry. Some blamed an earthquake felt miles away. Others suspected upstream mining operations. Whatever the cause, the town's namesake became nothing more than a dusty gully cutting through the eastern edge of settlement. Within months, the first mine closed. Others followed as extraction costs rose with the need to haul water from distant sources. By the time Eleanor arrived in 1876, Dead Creek was home to barely 100 souls, mostly those too stubborn or too broke to leave. What drew Eleanor to such a place became clearer as Sheriff Holden examined the few possessions in her room more carefully. Between the pages of a book on desert geology, he found several newspaper clippings, all concerning strange disappearances throughout the Southwest Territories over the past decade. The most recent, dated just 3 months before Eleanor's arrival in Dead Creek, detailed the vanishing of an entire family along a wagon trail in New Mexico Territory, less than 100 miles away. The discovery of these clippings transformed Holden's understanding of Eleanor. She hadn't randomly drifted to Dead Creek. She had come purposefully investigating something. But what? And how did it connect to her own disappearance? More puzzling still was the letter found tucked inside a volume of Apache legends, a letter addressed to Eleanor from someone identified only as J in Boston. My dear Eleanor, your latest findings about Dead Creek align with the pattern we've observed in other locations. The geographical similarities cannot be coincidental. If your theory about the connection between the silver mines and the anomalies is correct, then great caution is warranted. Remember what happened to Thornton in Nevada. Document everything, but do not attempt to approach any manifestations directly. The Society awaits your next report with great anticipation. You remain our most reliable field investigator. With concern for your safety, J. Sheriff Holden read the letter multiple times, struggling to make sense of it. What society? What manifestations? And who was Thornton? None of it aligned with what the townspeople knew of Eleanor, a quiet, private woman who minded her own business and seemed content with her modest position at the Broken Spoke. While the sheriff pursued these questions, the discovery of the first body changed everything. Matthew Collins, a prospector who still worked a small claim north of town, was found dead along the trail to Copper Canyon, precisely where searchers had looked for signs of Eleanor 2 weeks earlier. Collins lay on his back, arms and legs arranged in a perfect X, his eyes open and filled with sand. Beside him was a page torn from a journal, weighted down with a small rock. The page contained Eleanor's handwriting, April 17th, 1877. Collins came to the saloon again tonight, drunk and boasting about finding the mother lode in the north shaft. Called it silver that moves on its own. When pressed, he admitted to having broken through into some kind of underground chamber. Said the walls were covered in markings, older than the Indians. He's planning to return tomorrow with lanterns to explore further. I must follow him. If my theory is correct, he may have found one of the chambers mentioned in Professor Blackwood's journals. The reference to Professor Blackwood struck Holden immediately. Was Eleanor related to this professor? Was this her father? The stern man in the photograph? None of the townsfolk had ever heard Eleanor mention a professor or indicate any connection to academic circles. Sheriff Holden expanded his investigation, questioning miners who knew Collins. Several confirmed that Collins had indeed been excitedly discussing a new find in the days before his death, though none had taken him seriously. Collins had a reputation for grandiose claims and was deep in debt to both the assay office and Harold Tillman at the Broken Spoke. The body itself revealed little about the cause of death. Doc Wilson, who doubled as the town's barber and medical examiner, found no wounds, no signs of struggle, and no obvious indicators of how Collins had died. If I had to guess, he told Holden, I'd say fear killed him. Never seen a face frozen in such terror. 3 days after Collins's body was found, a second victim appeared in nearly the same location. Thomas Reeves, the young assistant at the general store, arranged in the same X pattern, with another page from Eleanor's journal placed beside him. May 2nd, 1877. Reeves unwittingly confirmed my suspicions today. While delivering supplies to the assay office, he mentioned finding strange silver artifacts in a storeroom, pieces turned in by miners years ago that no one could identify. He described them as silver discs with holes in the center, covered in tiny writing that looks like insects. This matches exactly the artifacts found at the Nevada and New Mexico sites. When I asked if I could see them, he became uncomfortable and said they'd been locked away by order of Mr. Wilcox at the assay office. Bad luck, he called them. Things go missing around them. The town of Dead Creek, already uneasy after Eleanor's disappearance and Collins' mysterious death, now teetered on the edge of panic. Sheriff Holden called a town meeting at the church, the only building large enough to hold the remaining residents. There, he tried to calm fears while revealing little about the pages found with the bodies. We're dealing with a murderer, plain and simple, he assured them. Someone who wants us to believe there's something supernatural happening. But I've seen this kind of misdirection before. Yet even as he spoke, Holden knew he was facing something beyond his experience. The positioning of the bodies, the missing Eleanor, the strange journal pages, it all pointed to something more complex than simple murder. And he couldn't shake the feeling that the answer lay somewhere in the history of Dead Creek itself, in whatever Eleanor had been investigating before she vanished. After the meeting, Lucy Henshaw approached the sheriff privately. There's something I didn't mention before, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The night she disappeared, Eleanor showed me something, a small silver disc with a hole in the center, covered in markings. Said she'd found it near the Old North mine. Said it was proof. Proof of what? Holden asked. Lucy's eyes filled with tears. She wouldn't say exactly, just that Dead Creek was built on something ancient, something that doesn't belong in our world. She said the silver wasn't just in veins underground. It was put there, arranged in patterns. By what or who she wouldn't tell me. As Sheriff Holden stood at the threshold of the abandoned assay office, the lock already broken by someone who had come before him, he felt the weight of Dead Creek's silence pressing down. The town had nearly emptied over the past week. Those who could leave had packed what they could carry and headed for larger settlements, spreading tales of a curse that had awakened in the desert. Only about 30 residents remained, mostly those too poor to start over elsewhere or too stubborn to admit defeat. Inside the assay office, dust motes danced in the shafts of light piercing through boarded windows. The place had been officially closed for months, since Wilcox, the assayer, had departed for San Francisco. But according to Lucy's information, Wilcox had left something behind. Those strange silver artifacts that Reeves had mentioned. Holden moved through the abandoned building methodically, checking desk drawers and cabinets. In the back room, where ore samples were once tested for purity, he found what he was looking for. A small iron safe, its door hanging open. Inside was nothing but empty velvet pouches and a note written in the same handwriting as the pages found with the bodies. I've taken what Wilcox tried to hide. These artifacts were never meant to be collected or contained. They need to be returned to the chamber. It's the only way to restore balance. Eleanor had been there sometime before her disappearance. But if she had taken the silver artifacts, where were they now? Had she managed to return them as her note suggested? And if so, to where? Holden's investigation took him next to the North Mine, the abandoned shaft where Collins claimed to have made his discovery. The entrance was partially collapsed, requiring Holden to squeeze through a narrow opening. Inside, lamp in hand, he followed the main tunnel until he reached a junction where a newer passage branched off to the right, the tool marks still relatively fresh. Collins had indeed been working here recently. The tunnel descended steeply for about 30 yards before opening into a larger chamber. And there, Holden saw it. What Collins must have discovered. Part of the chamber wall had collapsed, revealing an opening into another space beyond. But unlike the rough-hewn mining tunnels, this opening led to a perfectly circular chamber with smooth walls that seemed to shimmer even in the dim lamplight. Approaching cautiously, Holden raised his lamp higher. The walls were covered in markings, symbols unlike any language he had ever seen, intricate patterns that seemed to shift if looked at directly. And embedded in the walls at regular intervals were small niches, most empty but a few still containing what had to be the artifacts Eleanor had mentioned. Silver discs approximately 3 inches in diameter, with holes in their centers, covered in the same strange markings as the walls. If this was what Eleanor had called a chamber, then he could understand her excitement. This wasn't a natural formation, nor did it appear to be created by any Native American culture he was familiar with. This was something else entirely, something that predated the settlement of Dead Creek by centuries, perhaps millennia. In the center of the chamber stood a stone pedestal, and arranged on it in a specific pattern were more silver discs, freshly placed with no dust covering them. These, Holden surmised, must be the artifacts Eleanor had taken from the assay office. She had indeed returned them, arranging them in some pattern that obviously held meaning for her. But the pattern was incomplete. Several spaces on the pedestal remained empty, suggesting that some discs were still missing. And near the pedestal lay a familiar object, Eleanor's leather journal, open to a page containing a diagram that matched the arrangement on the pedestal. Holden picked up the journal carefully, aware that he was holding the source of the pages found with the bodies. The journal contained meticulous notes, sketches, and observations, all in Eleanor's neat handwriting. It documented her investigation from the moment she arrived in Dead Creek, revealing a woman of considerable education and scientific methodology, a far cry from the quiet saloon girl the town had known. If you've watched this far, did you ever experience the unsettling feeling of being watched while alone in a desolate place? Comment below with "The Desert Remembers" and share your experience. The journal revealed that Eleanor Blackwood was, in fact, the daughter of Professor James Blackwood, a controversial archaeologist who had been discredited by his peers for proposing that ancient civilizations had discovered and utilized technologies beyond what conventional history acknowledged. After her father's death, Eleanor had continued his work through an organization called the Society for Historical Truth, the society mentioned in the letter from Jay. According to her notes, Dead Creek was one of several locations throughout the Southwest where her father had theorized the existence of what he called threshold chambers, artificially created spaces where the boundary between our world and something else grew thin. The silver discs were not merely artifacts but components of a mechanism designed to either strengthen or weaken that boundary, depending on their arrangement. Eleanor had come to Dead Creek tracking a pattern of disappearances and strange phenomena, believing they were connected to the disruption of these ancient mechanisms caused by modern mining operations. The silver veins that had attracted prospectors weren't random geological formations, but deliberately placed markers around the chambers. By extracting the silver, miners had unwittingly damaged a system designed to keep something contained. Holden's hands trembled as he read Eleanor's final entries. June 12, 1877. Collins's discovery confirms everything. The North Mine chamber is intact, unlike the damaged sites in Nevada and New Mexico. If I can gather all the disks removed over the years and restore the original pattern, I may be able to re-establish the boundary. The fog is appearing more frequently now, a symptom of the weakening threshold. What lies beyond seeks entry into our world. June 14, 1877. I've recovered most of the disks from the assay office, but 3 are still missing. Wilcox must have taken them when he left. Without the complete set, the pattern cannot be restored. I fear what may happen if the boundary continues to weaken. Already the fog has become more persistent, and within it I've glimpsed movement. Not shapes exactly, but disturbances in the air itself, as if something is testing the veil between worlds. The final entry was dated June 15th, the day Eleanor disappeared. I've located the remaining disks. Wilcox didn't take them. He buried them beside the dry creek bed, believing them to be bad luck. Tonight, I will return them to the chamber and complete the pattern. If I'm successful, the boundary will be restored and the fog should dissipate. If not, I've left copies of my research with Lucy, with instructions to send them to Jay in Boston. Whatever happens, the society must know what I've discovered here. But Lucy had mentioned nothing about being given research papers. When questioned, she admitted that Eleanor had given her a sealed package to mail if anything happened, which she had dutifully sent the day after Eleanor's disappearance. Whatever documentation Eleanor had prepared was now en route to Boston, to the mysterious J. Standing in the ancient chamber, surrounded by symbols he couldn't begin to comprehend, Sheriff Holden faced a decision. Should he attempt to complete Eleanor's work, placing the missing discs in the pattern she had started? Or was that precisely what had led to her disappearance? And then he noticed something that made his blood run cold. At the edge of the journal page showing the disc pattern was a small notation in Eleanor's hand. Warning. Once begun, the restoration must be completed within a single lunar cycle. If interrupted, the boundary fails completely. Today marked exactly 1 lunar cycle since Eleanor had vanished into the fog. That evening, as Sheriff Holden convened with the few remaining town leaders at the Broken Spoke, a dense fog rolled in from the direction of Copper Canyon, thicker than any previously seen, moving against the wind in slow, deliberate tendrils that curled around buildings and seeped through closed windows. The air grew unnaturally still, and with the fog came a silence that swallowed even the sound of breathing. Inside the saloon, Harold Tillman nervously polished glasses, while Doc Wilson, Lucy Henshaw, and Abigail Parker listened to Holden's account of what he had found in the North Mine. He had brought Eleanor's journal, laying it open on the bar for all to see. So you're suggesting that this town was built on top of some kind of, what? Ancient technology? A doorway to somewhere else? Doc Wilson's skepticism was evident in his tone. And Eleanor Blackwood, whom we all knew as nothing more than a saloon girl, was actually some kind of scientist investigating this. I know how it sounds, Holden admitted. But I've seen the chamber myself. It's not natural, and it's not anything made by any civilization we know of, and these silver discs... He placed one on the bar that he had taken from the chamber. Look at the craftsmanship, the symbols. This isn't something made with modern tools. They all leaned in to examine the disc. In the lamplight, the markings seemed to shift subtly, as if refusing to be pinned down by direct observation. Lucy was the first to draw back. Eleanor showed me one of these. She said they were keys. Keys to what? Abigail asked. She wouldn't say exactly, just that they were meant to keep something locked away, and that the mining had disrupted their purpose. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows, obscuring the street entirely. Occasionally, shadows seemed to move within it, not solid forms, but disturbances in the mist itself, as if parts of the fog were more densely packed than others. Whatever's happening, Holden said, it's connected to that chamber and these discs. According to Eleanor's notes, she was trying to restore some kind of boundary by arranging these discs in a specific pattern. She started the process but didn't finish it before she disappeared. And now, a complete lunar cycle later. The boundary is failing completely, Harold Tillman finished, quoting what Holden had read from Eleanor's journal. So what do we do? Try to finish what she started? That may be what got her taken in the first place, Doc Wilson pointed out. Or it may be our only chance to stop whatever's happening, Holden countered. Look outside. That fog isn't natural. And Collins and Reeves didn't die of any cause I've ever seen. Something is coming through from somewhere else, and according to Eleanor's research, it's only going to get worse unless the boundary is restored. A sound from outside interrupted them. A long, low scraping, like something heavy being dragged across the dirt street. They all froze, listening. It came again, closer to the saloon doors. Whatever we decide, Abigail whispered. We need to decide quickly. Holden opened Eleanor's journal to the diagram showing the disc arrangement. She was missing 3 discs when she disappeared. I found 2 buried exactly where her notes said they would be beside the dry creek bed. But the third, he shook his head. It's not mentioned in her later entries. What happens if we try to restore the pattern without all the discs? Lucy asked. Holden turned a page in the journal, revealing Eleanor's careful notes. Partial restoration temporarily strengthens the boundary, but creates instability. Complete restoration is required for permanent sealing. The scraping sound came again, now directly outside the saloon doors. Within the fog, shapes moved with more purpose now, still indistinct, but more solid than before. The doors rattled, as if something were testing them. We need to try, Holden decided. Even a temporary strengthening would buy us time to figure out where the last disc is. I'll go to the chamber now, place the discs we have in the pattern Eleanor started. The rest of you should barricade yourselves in here until I get back. You can't go alone, Lucy insisted. Eleanor went alone and she vanished. I'm coming with you. Before anyone could argue further, the saloon doors burst open and the fog poured in like a living thing. Within it, moving shapes began to coalesce, not quite human, not quite animal, forms that seemed to be assembled from the mist itself. As they watched in horror, one of these forms took on a more definite shape, a silhouette that all of them recognized. Eleanor Blackwood stood in the doorway, or something wearing her appearance. Her form was misty around the edges, as if not fully materialized, and her eyes reflected the lamplight in a way that was decidedly inhuman. When she spoke, her voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. You found my journal. Good. There isn't much time. The apparition of Eleanor moved into the saloon, the fog swirling around her feet. The others backed away, except for Holden, who stood his ground, one hand on his pistol, though he suspected it would be useless against whatever this was. Are you Eleanor Blackwood? He demanded. Or something else using her form. The figure smiled, a sad expression that didn't reach those reflective eyes. I am what remains of Eleanor. Part of me is still elsewhere, but I managed to anchor a portion of my consciousness to the discs I placed in the chamber. It's an imperfect connection, which is why I can only manifest now, when the boundary is at its weakest. What happened to you? Lucy asked, tears streaming down her face. Where did you go? The fog is a membrane between worlds, the Eleanor thing explained. A thinning of reality. I tried to strengthen the boundary by returning the discs to their proper places, but I was interrupted. Pulled through before I could complete the pattern. On the other side is difficult to describe. A place of shadows and whispers, where time and space fold in on themselves. The things that dwell there have been trying to find a way through for centuries. The chamber and the discs were created to keep them contained. Created by whom? Doc Wilson asked. A civilization far older than any our history's record, Eleanor's apparition replied. They understood that reality is more fragile than we believe, that there are places where the walls between worlds grow thin naturally. They built the chambers at these weak points, using the properties of silver to reinforce the boundaries. And now those boundaries are failing, Holden concluded. Eleanor's form flickered, like a candle flame in a breeze. Yes. When miners extracted the silver veins, they unknowingly damaged the system. The fog is a symptom of the deterioration, and within it, the shadow folk move closer to breaking through completely. Shadow folk? Abigail whispered. That's what I call them. They have no name we could pronounce. They exist in the spaces between matter, feeding on essence, life force. What happened to Collins and Reeves was just the beginning. If the boundary fails completely, everything within miles will be consumed. Outside, the shapes in the fog were growing more numerous, pressing against every window of the saloon, their forms becoming more defined with each passing moment. "The third disc," Holden said urgently. "We have 2, but you mentioned 3 were missing. Where is it?" Eleanor's apparition gestured toward Lucy. "She's wearing it." All eyes turned to Lucy, who reached up to touch the silver pendant hanging around her neck, a gift from Eleanor weeks ago. She had never looked at it closely, assuming it was just a simple piece of jewelry. But as she examined it now, she could see the same strange markings that covered the disc on the bar. "You gave this to me," she said to Eleanor's form. "Why?" "Insurance," the apparition replied. "I suspected someone might try to stop me. Someone connected to what's happening. By separating the discs, I ensured that even if I failed, there would be a chance for others to complete my work." "Someone connected to what's happening?" Holden repeated. "You mean someone in town was working against you? Who?" The fog outside thickened further, and Eleanor's form began to fade, becoming more transparent. "No time. The boundary is collapsing faster than I anticipated. Take the discs to the chamber. Complete the pattern. It's the only way." "And what happens to you?" Lucy asked. Eleanor's apparition smiled that sad smile again. "If you succeed, the boundary will be restored. Those caught on the other side will remain there, including the part of me that was pulled through." "There must be another way," Holden insisted. "Some way to bring you back completely." "The choice is simple," Eleanor's fading form replied. "Sacrifice one to save many. My father taught me that some prices must be paid for knowledge. This is mine." Her form grew fainter still, barely visible now. "Hurry, before midnight. That's when the lunar cycle completes and the boundary—" Her voice trailed off as her apparition dissolved completely into the fog, which began to retreat from the saloon as suddenly as it had entered, pulling back out into the street. But the shapes within it remained, more solid than before, watching from just beyond the threshold. Lucy removed the pendant from around her neck, holding it out to Holden. "We have to do this, for Eleanor, for everyone." Holden took the disc, adding it to the 2 he already possessed. "I'll go to the chamber now. The rest of you barricade yourselves in here. Don't let anything in, no matter what you see or hear." "I'm still coming with you," Lucy insisted. "Eleanor trusted me with that disc for a reason. I should be there when you place it." Despite the protests of the others, Holden reluctantly agreed. Time was running short, and arguing would only waste precious minutes. Together, he and Lucy slipped out the back door of the saloon and made their way toward the north mine, keeping to the shadows where the fog seemed thinner. Behind them, the shapes in the mist began to follow, moving with a terrible purpose through the silent streets of Dead Creek. The journey to the north mine entrance felt like moving through a nightmare. The fog parted before Holden and Lucy, only to close again behind them, creating a narrow corridor of visibility that extended just a few feet in any direction. Within the swirling mist, shapes moved alongside them, never quite visible but unmistakably present, like sharks circling in murky water. Occasionally, a form would press closer to the edge of their small, clear space, becoming almost distinct enough to identify. These near manifestations were the most terrifying, suggestions of bodies with limbs that bent in impossible directions, faces with features that shifted and flowed like water. "Don't look directly at them," Holden advised, keeping his voice low. "That seems to draw their attention." Lucy nodded, keeping her eyes fixed on the path ahead. "Eleanor called them shadow folk. What do you think they really are?" "I don't know," Holden admitted. "Maybe they're exactly what Eleanor described, beings from another realm. Or maybe there's something our minds can't properly comprehend, so we see them as shadows and mist." They reached the mine entrance without incident, though both felt the pressure of unseen eyes watching their every move. The opening was just as Holden had left it, a narrow gap in the partially collapsed entrance, barely wide enough for an adult to squeeze through. "I'll go first," he said, lighting a lamp he had brought from the saloon. "Follow close behind me. The tunnel branches, but we want to take the right fork down to the chamber." Inside, the mine was eerily silent. No dripping water, no settling timbers, not even the scurrying of rodents that typically inhabited abandoned diggings. Their footsteps echoed off the stone walls as they made their way deeper, the lamplight creating grotesque shadows that seemed almost as alive as the forms in the fog outside. At the junction, they turned right as planned, descending the newer tunnel toward the chamber Collins had discovered. The air grew noticeably cooler as they descended, carrying a metallic taste that coated the tongue. "Do you smell that?" Lucy asked suddenly. "Like ozone. Like the air before a lightning storm." Holden nodded. He had noticed it too, a crackling energy that made the hair on his arms stand on end. Something was building, a tension in the very fabric of the place that hadn't been present during his earlier visit. They reached the opening to the circular chamber, and both gasped at what they saw. The smooth walls now pulsed with a faint blue luminescence, the strange symbols glowing as if lit from within. The niches that had held the silver discs were empty. All the artifacts Holden had seen earlier were gone. But most disturbing was the center of the chamber. The stone pedestal where Eleanor had arranged some of the discs was now surrounded by a column of swirling mist, the same fog that filled the streets above, but here confined to a perfect cylinder stretching from floor to ceiling. Within this misty column, shapes moved with greater definition than those outside, as if the concentrated fog allowed them to take more substantial form. And on the pedestal itself, the pattern of discs Eleanor had started was now in disarray, the artifacts scattered across the stone surface. "Someone's been here," Holden said grimly. "Someone who doesn't want the pattern completed." As if in response to his words, a figure stepped out from behind the misty column, Harold Tillman, the saloon keeper, holding a shotgun pointed directly at them. "That's far enough," Tillman said, his voice strangely calm. "Put the discs on the ground and back away." Holden kept his hand well away from his holstered pistol, aware that at this range, Tillman's shotgun would cut him in half before he could draw. "Harold, what are you doing here? How did you get ahead of us?" Tillman smiled, an expression devoid of warmth. "There's more than one way into this chamber. The old-timers knew about it years ago, those who were part of the arrangement." "What arrangement?" Lucy asked, her voice trembling. "The profitable one," Tillman replied simply. "The one that kept Dead Creek prosperous long after the silver should have run out. Did you never wonder why our little settlement survived when other mining towns dried up and blew away? Why people stayed even after the creek itself disappeared?" Holden's mind raced, trying to make sense of Tillman's words. "You're saying some people in town knew about this chamber? About what it contained?" "Not exactly what it contained," Tillman clarified, "but they knew it was valuable, special. The original settlers found it by accident while digging the first mine shafts. They discovered that removing certain silver artifacts from the chamber brought benefits, good fortune, dreams that revealed new silver veins, healing from injuries that should have been fatal. They were disrupting the boundary," Holden realized, "weakening it to let something through, something that granted favors in exchange for more damage to the barrier." Tillman nodded. "Smart man, Sheriff. Yes, that's exactly what happened. A bargain, of sorts. Only a few were ever part of it. The town founders, key business owners passed down through the generations. My father was one. He brought me into it when I was old enough." "And the price?" Lucy demanded. "Collins and Reeves, Eleanor, were they the price of your bargain?" A shadow passed over Tillman's face. "There are always costs to prosperity. The shadow folk require anchors, physical forms to help them maintain presence on our side. Not everyone is suitable. They choose those with certain qualities, sensitivity, perception, insight. Eleanor was perfect. They had been watching her since she arrived." "You knew what she was?" Holden asked. "That she was investigating the boundary?" "Not at first," Tillman admitted. She played her role well, the quiet, unassuming saloon girl. By the time I realized who she really was, what she was doing, she had already found the chamber and begun restoring the pattern. I tried to stop her, but she managed to place several discs before I could intervene. "So you're the one who interrupted her that night," Holden said, the pieces finally falling into place. "You followed her into the fog." Tillman's expression darkened. "I did what was necessary to protect our arrangement. Without the Shadow Folk's gifts, Dead Creek would have perished years ago. I couldn't let her seal the boundary." "And now?" Lucy asked. "The town is nearly empty. Collins and Reeves are dead. What prosperity are you protecting now?" "The Shadow Folk have promised greater rewards once the boundary falls completely," Tillman replied, a fervent light in his eyes. "Not just small favors and limited manifestations, but a full crossing. They will remake Dead Creek into a nexus between worlds. Those of us who facilitated their coming will be elevated, transformed into something beyond human." The fanaticism in Tillman's voice sent chills down Holden's spine. The saloon keeper had clearly descended into madness, or perhaps had been influenced by whatever lay on the other side of the boundary. "Harold," he said carefully, "you've seen what these things did to Collins and Reeves, what they did to Eleanor. They're not here to elevate humanity. They're predators. They consume." "You don't understand their nature," Tillman insisted. "Those deaths were necessary transitions, the beginning of transformation. Even now, parts of Collins and Reeves exist on the other side, experiencing wonders beyond our comprehension." As Tillman spoke, the misty column behind him pulsed, growing more opaque. The shapes within it pressed against the fog as if testing its solidity, leaving impressions of hands, faces, and less recognizable appendages. The blue glow from the wall symbols intensified, bathing the chamber in cold light. "It's midnight," Lucy whispered to Holden. "The lunar cycle is complete." Tillman must have heard her because he smiled that empty smile again. "Yes, the moment approaches. The boundary is ready to collapse entirely. I just need to make sure you don't interfere." He raised the shotgun higher. "Put those discs down, now." Holden slowly reached into his pocket, removing the 3 silver discs. As he made to place them on the ground, he deliberately fumbled, sending one disc rolling toward the wall. It was a desperate ploy, but it worked. Tillman's eyes followed the rolling disc for just a fraction of a second, enough time for Holden to lunge forward. The shotgun roared, the blast deafening in the confined space. Holden felt the heat of buckshot passing inches from his head as he crashed into Tillman, driving him backward toward the misty column. They struggled, Holden trying to wrest the shotgun away, Tillman fighting with the strength of fanaticism. "Lucy!" Holden shouted over his shoulder. "The discs! Complete the pattern!" Lucy rushed to the pedestal, gathering the scattered discs and trying to arrange them according to the diagram she had memorized from Eleanor's journal. But there were so many, and the pattern was complex, concentric circles with specific discs in specific positions. Meanwhile, Holden and Tillman's struggle had carried them to the very edge of the misty column. As they grappled, Tillman suddenly smiled, a triumphant, terrible expression. "Too late, Sheriff," he hissed. "Feel it? The boundary is failing. They're coming through." And indeed, Holden could feel a change in the very air around them. The mist of the column was expanding, reaching tendrils outward like a living thing. Where it touched the stone floor, the rock seemed to soften and flow. The blue light from the wall symbols pulsed faster, now almost stroboscopic in its intensity. With a final desperate effort, Holden shoved Tillman backward. The saloon keeper stumbled, losing his balance, and fell partially into the misty column. What happened next would haunt Holden's nightmares for years to come. The mist enveloped Tillman from the waist up, his legs still visible on their side of the boundary. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Tillman began to scream, a sound of such primal terror that it froze Holden in place. Tillman's legs kicked wildly as he was drawn deeper into the mist, his screams taking on a wet, gurgling quality before cutting off abruptly. When the mist receded slightly, Tillman was gone, completely absorbed into whatever lay on the other side. Holden! Lucy's panicked voice broke through his horror. I can't figure out the pattern. There are too many possibilities. Holden rushed to her side, staring down at the jumble of silver discs on the pedestal. Without Eleanor's journal for reference, the correct arrangement was impossible to determine. There were at least 30 discs, each with unique markings, and the pattern involved multiple layers and orientations. The chamber began to shake, small stones falling from the ceiling. The misty column expanded further, now almost touching the pedestal itself. Within it, the shapes were becoming more defined, more solid, almost ready to step through. And then, like an echo from the fog itself, they heard Eleanor's voice again. The center disc. Turn it clockwise. The pattern aligns with the constellations above Dead Creek. Looking up, Holden saw Eleanor's form materializing beside the column, fainter than before, flickering like a candle about to be extinguished, but unmistakably her. Hurry! Her apparition urged. I can't maintain this connection much longer. Lucy quickly rotated the center disc, and suddenly the pattern became clear. The arrangement of discs mirrored the night sky as seen from Dead Creek, with specific stars represented by specific artifacts. Working together, Holden and Lucy rapidly placed the remaining discs, including the 3 they had brought. As the final disc slid into place, the effect was immediate and dramatic. The misty column contracted violently, pulling inward like water down a drain. The blue glow from the wall symbols stabilized, no longer pulsing but shining with a steady, calming light. The shaking subsided, the chamber growing still. On the other side of the pedestal, Eleanor's apparition grew more transparent with each passing second. You did it, she said, her voice now barely audible. The boundary is restored, strengthened beyond what it was before. They won't be able to attempt another crossing for centuries. Eleanor, Lucy called out, tears streaming down her face. Is there no way to bring you back? The apparition shook her head sadly. I'm anchored to the other side now, but this part of me, this echo, it will fade as the boundary stabilizes completely. It's better this way. What I've seen there, no human mind should contain such knowledge. What about the others? Holden asked. Collins, Reeves, Tillman? Gone, Eleanor's fading form replied. Consumed entirely. I survived only because of my connection to the discs, to the pattern. My father's research, it prepared me, somewhat. Her form was now barely visible, just a suggestion of human shape in the air above the pedestal. The society will send others, eventually, to monitor the boundary. Tell them Eleanor Blackwood completed her father's work. Tell them the price was worth paying. With those words, her apparition vanished completely, leaving Holden and Lucy alone in the chamber with the softly glowing symbols and the perfectly arranged pattern of silver discs. After a long moment of silence, Lucy spoke. What do we do now? Holden looked at the pedestal, at the pattern they had restored. We protect this place, seal off the mine entrance, make sure no one disturbs the pattern again, and we wait for Eleanor's people to arrive. Together, they made their way back up to the surface, emerging from the mine entrance into the cool night air. The fog had disappeared entirely, leaving the sky clear and brilliant with stars, the same pattern they had recreated with the silver discs below. Dead Creek was silent, its few remaining buildings dark shapes against the starlit desert, but it no longer felt threatening, just empty, abandoned, a place whose time had passed. Will you stay? Lucy asked as they walked back toward town. Until the society sends someone? Holden nodded slowly. Someone has to keep watch. Might as well be me. He looked at the young woman beside him, who had shown more courage tonight than most men he had known. What about you? Lucy gazed at the stars for a long moment before answering. Eleanor trusted me. She gave me one of the discs for safekeeping. I think she was grooming me to take her place eventually, to join the society. She turned to Holden with newfound determination in her eyes. I want to understand what she knew. I want to continue her work. As they reached the main street, the first light of dawn was breaking over the eastern mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. Dead Creek would never again be the town it once was. Its silver was gone, its creek dry, its prosperity built on a terrible bargain now broken. But perhaps, Holden thought, it could become something else, a watchtower, a place of knowledge rather than extraction. A monument to Eleanor Blackwood, who had walked into the desert fog and sacrificed herself to save a world that would never know her name. 1 year later, the settlement formerly known as Dead Creek had dwindled to just a handful of structures still standing against the desert wind. The main street, once bustling with miners and merchants, now lay silent except for the occasional tumbleweeds that gathered against abandoned storefronts. The broken spoke saloon remained, though its doors were now permanently closed, its windows boarded up. Beside it stood the sheriff's office, one of the few buildings showing signs of habitation, a thin wisp of smoke rising from its chimney, a lantern glowing in its window each night. Sheriff James Holden had kept his promise to remain as guardian of the secret beneath the North Mine. He had personally supervised the partial collapse of the main tunnel, making it appear as if a natural cave-in had rendered the mine inaccessible. Only he and Lucy Henshaw knew of the secondary entrance, the one Tillman had used, which they kept clear but carefully concealed. Once a week, they made the journey into the chamber to check the disk pattern and ensure nothing had been disturbed. The blue symbols on the walls continued to glow with steady light, and the air inside remained charged with that peculiar metallic taste, but no fog had reappeared, no shapes moved within non-existent mist. The boundary, it seemed, had been fully restored. Lucy had taken up residence in Eleanor's old room behind the barber shop, converting it into a study filled with books sent by the Society for Historical Truth. True to Holden's expectation, representatives had arrived 3 months after the events at the chamber. 2 scholarly gentlemen from Boston who had interviewed both Holden and Lucy extensively before confirming that Lucy would be trained as their new field agent in the Southwest Territories. Eleanor chose wisely, the older of the two had said, a man who introduced himself only as Jay, the same Jay who had corresponded with Eleanor. You have the perception needed for this work, Ms. Henshaw. The ability to see beyond conventional explanations. They had offered Holden a position as well, but he had declined. I'm a simple lawman, he told them. I'll keep watch over this place, but the bigger questions, those are for minds like Lucy's. The society representatives had spent 2 weeks in what remained of Dead Creek, cataloging everything in the chamber, making drawings of the symbols, and taking extensive notes on the events leading up to Eleanor's disappearance. Before departing, they had left Lucy with instructions, books, and the promise of regular correspondence. There are other chambers, Jay had explained, other boundaries that require monitoring. Miss Blackwood's sacrifice helped us understand the pattern, how these thresholds work, how they can be maintained. Her work will save countless lives. Now, a year later, Holden sat on the porch of his office, watching the sun sink toward the western horizon. The air was cool, the sky painted in stunning oranges and purples that only the desert could produce. Days like this, it was hard to believe that anything dark or threatening had ever occurred here. The land seemed peaceful, ancient, indifferent to human concerns. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew his attention. Lucy was returning from Copper Canyon Station, where she now traveled weekly to collect mail from the society and to send her own reports. She had grown in the past year, not physically, but in confidence and purpose. Her eyes held a depth of knowledge that reminded Holden of Eleanor, though he never said so aloud. "Any news?" he asked as she dismounted. Lucy nodded, reaching into her saddlebag to withdraw a thick envelope. "They've found another chamber, in Colorado Territory. Similar symbols, similar artifacts. They're sending a team to investigate." "And you?" Holden asked, though he already suspected the answer. "They want me there. My experience with what happened here. They believe it will be valuable." She handed him a separate letter. "They've asked you to accompany me. They're offering compensation, of course." Holden took the letter but didn't open it immediately. "And the chamber here? Who watches it if we both leave?" "They're sending replacements, a husband and wife team who've worked with the society for years. They'll maintain our weekly inspections. Lucy's expression grew serious. You should come, James. What we learned here, it might help prevent another tragedy like what happened to Eleanor. Holden considered this as he watched the last sliver of sun disappear behind the mountains. In the year since that night in the chamber, he had changed as well. The world he thought he understood had been revealed as just the surface of something far more complex, more mysterious. There were moments, especially in the quiet hours before dawn, when he found himself staring at the stars and wondering what other secrets they concealed. When do they need an answer? He asked finally. The replacements arrive next week. We would leave 2 days after. Lucy hesitated, then added, I could use your help, James. Your steadiness, your common sense. This work, it can take you to strange places, mentally as well as physically. Holden nodded slowly. I'll think about it. Later that night, after Lucy had returned to her quarters, Holden made his own journey to the North Mine. He did this occasionally, visiting the chamber alone, though he knew Lucy would disapprove of the risk. Something about the place called to him, especially on clear nights when the stars were bright. Inside the chamber, everything was as it should be, the disc pattern undisturbed, the wall symbols glowing with that steady blue light. But tonight, something felt different. The air seemed more charged than usual, carrying a subtle vibration that he felt rather than heard. As he stood beside the pedestal, examining the disc pattern to ensure nothing had shifted, a familiar sensation washed over him, that feeling of being watched, of presence without form. He turned slowly, surveying the chamber. Eleanor, he called softly, feeling somewhat foolish even as he spoke the name. Are you here? No apparition appeared, no voice echoed from the walls. But the blue glow intensified momentarily, pulsing once before returning to its steady state. And in that pulse, Holden felt something. Not communication exactly, not a message that could be put into words, but a sense of acknowledgement, of awareness. The boundary was solid, but not impermeable to all things. Some essence, some echo of Eleanor Blackwood remained connected to this place. Holden stayed in the chamber for nearly an hour, not speaking again, simply being present in that ancient space where worlds had nearly collided. When he finally left, his decision was made. The following morning, he informed Lucy that he would accompany her to Colorado Territory. Someone needs to keep you from wandering into strange fog banks, he said with a rare smile. She laughed, relief evident in her expression. I was hoping you'd say that. The society will be pleased. I'm not doing it for the society, Holden clarified. I'm doing it because... He paused, trying to find the right words. Because Eleanor started something important, and I want to see it through. A week later, the replacements arrived. Dr. Samuel Pierce and his wife, Catherine, both older with the calm, measured demeanor of academics who had seen enough of the world's strangeness to no longer be easily shocked. Holden and Lucy spent 2 days showing them the chamber, explaining the weekly inspection procedures and warning them about signs of boundary weakness they should watch for. On their final night in Dead Creek, Holden stood on the main street, looking out toward where Eleanor had vanished into the fog a year earlier. The town would likely disappear entirely within a few more years, reclaimed by the desert as so many boom and bust settlements had been before it. But what lay beneath it would remain, an ancient mechanism, a threshold between worlds, a boundary restored by sacrifice. Do you think we'll ever know the full truth? Lucy asked, joining him in the starlight. About what's on the other side? About the civilization that built the chambers? Holden considered the question carefully before answering. Some truths aren't meant for us to know completely. They're too vast, too alien to our understanding. What matters is that we recognize them when we encounter them, that we respect the boundaries, both literal and figurative. Lucy nodded thoughtfully. Eleanor used to say something similar. She told me once that her father's greatest mistake was believing that all knowledge should be pursued, regardless of cost. She looked up at the star-filled sky. She chose differently. She chose protection over revelation, As they stood in contemplative silence, a cool breeze swept down from the mountains, carrying the scent of sage and stone. For just a moment, so briefly that both would later wonder if they had imagined it, the air around them seemed to shimmer, and within that shimmer, a familiar silhouette appeared to stand beside them, gazing out toward the desert before fading back into the night. Neither spoke of what they had seen, but both understood its meaning. Eleanor Blackwood was gone but not forgotten. Something of her remained connected to this place, to this land, to the ancient secrets beneath the surface. And as long as the boundary held, as long as someone remembered her sacrifice, a part of her would continue to exist, a guardian spirit of Dead Creek, watching from beyond the threshold she had given her life to restore. The next morning, as they prepared to depart for Colorado Territory, Holden took one last look at the dying settlement. The desert had already begun to reclaim it, sand piling against doorways, sun bleaching the color from weathered boards, wind erasing the traces of human habitation. But beneath the surface, in that perfect circular chamber with its glowing symbols and silver pattern, something endured, a testament to those who had recognized darkness and stood against it. Eleanor of Dead Creek had walked into the desert fog and never reached the canyon. But her journey hadn't ended there. In some way Holden couldn't fully articulate, it continued, through Lucy's work with the society, through his own decision to join their efforts, through the knowledge that would help protect others from what lurked beyond the boundaries of our world. If you've watched this far, it's because you liked this story. Leave a comment saying, "I've watched this far," so I can get to know you and see who really enjoys the stories here on the channel. If you enjoyed this journey through the mysteries of the American frontier, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more historical tales that explore the hidden corners of our past, and share with others who appreciate stories where reality and mystery converge. For in the end, that was what the desert truly remembered. Not just the tragedies and the losses, but the courage of those who faced the unknown and made their stand. Eleanor Blackwood's name might fade from human memory, but the desert would remember. And in its vast, ancient silence, that remembrance was enough.